Hi, friends. Welcome to Lotus in the Light. My name's Jennifer. It's been a minute. I've been traveling. Um, so welcome back. Oh my goodness. I wanted to share today with you another story related to the cancellation of my New Zealand trip back in November, for those of you that may or may not have been keeping up. Um, and I just want to say, a lot of times I'm telling personal stories, and there's a reason I'm doing that. If you're on here like, why do I want to hear what's going on in your life? Then this might not be for you. That's okay. Feel free to turn me off. But at the end of the day, um, spirit works through our lives in the small, simple, regular, ongoing ways that we don't always notice. We think of God working in our life in these big, miraculous ways, which does happen. It does happen. But I would say that's like the 1%, right? The 99% are all these little small little things that are happening that we have been trained not to notice or not to give credit to or pay attention to. And so I like to demonstrate those so you can see how they've unfolded in my life that will maybe help you to notice them in your own life. So that being said, let's just take a deep breath in. If you haven't already done that, open yourself up as a channel to spirit, as a willing participant in this three-way connection between you, myself, and spirit, so that hopefully spirit's not just talking to me, but spirit's communicating with you, and I'm just maybe confirming things that you're already hearing, and vice versa. Like spirit is confirming things in me through you. So just trust that that's going both ways. Um, so I've told lots of stories around my canceled New Zealand trip back in November. November was my no shame November, my month where I was unashamedly going after all the joy in my life, like anything that felt good, I wanted to do. So I was so excited for this trip my husband and I had been planning for many, many months. And then the trip fell apart when we realized that his passport had been canceled. There were things that we could have done to force that trip to happen. We could have went and expedited an emergency passport. We could have done things to really make it happen. But because of the way that Spirit has revealed and awakened us this year, we recognize that there's a reason this is happening. And rather than resist the redirection that we believed was a divine redirection, we decided to trust and go with the flow. And the flow is taking us obviously away from this November trip. So, what has since unfolded is so many blessings because we didn't resist. So, lesson number one, let's not resist the flow, the natural flow. Everything in life has a natural flow. Just go with it and just trust that that flow is being divinely directed. And sometimes you feel like you're being or sometimes you feel like you're coming up against, what do we want to call them? Coming up against barriers. But usually those barriers are a divine redirection because we think things in life are supposed to be hard. That's how we know we're doing enough, right? Because we're working hard at it. But when we come up to these, what feel like roadblocks, it is divine redirection. Please trust that and go with the flow. And now, when I say divine redirection, you really got to get in touch and in tune with spirit to understand maybe there is something you're supposed to overcome there to move forward, but also maybe you're supposed to go a different way altogether. That's not for me to decide. That's for you to decide through your connection with spirit. But just know that the harder it feels, the more out of sync, the harder it feels, and the more negative it feels, the more out of sync you are with spirit. Okay. Um, so us trying to force this trip in November was creating negative feelings, like the fact that we would have had to drive to Detroit to get this emergency passport. And it just didn't sit well with my husband. And I said, if that doesn't feel worth the effort to go on this trip, like if that doesn't bring you the idea that this is a solution to get us to New Zealand this week, doesn't excite you, then it's probably not the path we're supposed to be on. So we're going to trust the instinct that that just felt so burdensome that it must not be the right direction or it wouldn't feel burdensome. Okay. So that's the path we went. Um, so this week, and I even need to back up. So in late October, before we were supposed to go to New Zealand, I had a work meeting that I attended that folks from our sister company were also at this meeting. These are people that I generally don't see or engage with very often because they're not within my company, they're within our sister company. But we all happened to be there. We went out to dinner together. I was telling one of the gentlemen about the upcoming New Zealand trip. Now, so he knows about this trip. Now, fast forward to this past week. I'm at another company meeting. There's about 200 of us there. We're on a break. I'm heading back from the break towards my table. I happened to walk past the same gentleman and he said, "Oh, Jennifer, hey, um, your ears must have been burning. We're literally talking about you." And I was like, "Oh, really?" Kind of weird because I don't really work with him on the daily. And he's like, "Yeah." And he introduced me to somebody and he said, he's getting ready to go to New Zealand. And I was telling him that you just got back from New Zealand. And I was like, "Well, funny story." And then I kind of told him what happened. Um, and in the course of that conversation, this other gentleman that's getting ready to go makes mention of, and I might be calling it the wrong name, but I'm going to call it the NZeta. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what that is. And he says, "That's the New Zealand passport." And I said, again, don't know what that is. Or not New Zealand. He said the New Zealand visa, the New Zealand visitor's visa. And I said, "I don't know what that is." I said, I have a passport. And he goes, "Well, no, you need a New Zealand visitor's visa to get into the country." I was like, "What? Why would my son who lives in New Zealand not tell me this?" Not realizing that he has a work visa, so he wouldn't have known, he's there for another reason. Um, but anyway, long story short, I went and researched it. I do, in fact, need a visitor's visa. I learned from someone else that had we flown and without it, we would have been put on the next flight back out. So that would have been basically more than $10,000 in airfare down the toilet and 48 hours of flying there and back for nothing. So just think about that for a minute. Think about all the things that feel so random that had to, and this is a fundamental truth that I've come to learn about life, is that what we think is random, what we think is chaos, is so divinely ordered. It is so perfectly patterned and created to work in our favor if we let it. And so I had to, for that to happen, I had to end up at the meeting in October with somebody I normally never see. I had to walk past him in this other meeting. Not only did I have to walk past him, but he had to notice me because I didn't notice him. He had to call out to me. He had to be telling the guy this story, or he wouldn't have called out to me. Um, and then in the course of that conversation, this guy had to bring up this random thing about the visitor visa. And I had to know to even inquire about it because I could have just let that whole piece of that conversation just go and like, okay, I don't know what he's talking about, but whatever. But no, I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. What are you referring to?" So it was like the whole thing had to, just the series of circumstances that had to unfold for me to even realize that we needed this so that when we do go next year, we're going in a few months, that we have the proper visa. So it just comes back to we knew that if we were meant to go in November, that spirit would have reminded me or my husband, "Hey, check that visa expiration." Like something would have triggered. We wouldn't have consciously probably known that it was spirit, but something would have, have you ever had that? Like something just popped in my mind and told me to look at that. And I did. And thank God I did, because like that would have happened. I know I'm in tune with spirit enough to know that, so that if we were meant to be there in November, that would have happened. And it didn't happen. And so we trusted there's some reason why we're not supposed to be there in November. And I do believe that that's one of the reasons. I've in previous videos stated several other reasons, work related and otherwise, that are just proving that this new timeline is really for our highest and best good, this new vacation timeline. So just thankful and feeling blessed. And this is where we just need to embrace some of those things that we perceive as negative, like figuring out your visa or your passport was expired 2 days before your trip. We would view that as negative, but the truth is sometimes that's just spirit's way of having your back. Okay, I'm going to close with a card. I instinctively picked this one up without really looking into it, so I'm just going to trust that this is supposed to be the one. That Spirit Animal Oracle has something to say to us on this matter. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for redirecting me on this vacation. And Spirit, what else, what bow do you have to put on this message to help us just better see and understand the little breadcrumbs you're always leaving for us that sometimes we might be missing? How do we better tune into that? Where do we go from here, Spirit? Where do we go from here? Okay, Justin, something's going to pop out here. And this is it, like sometimes it takes a little longer of a shuffle in the deck because I think it's Spirit's way of saying, like, trust the divine timing and um, um, don't get caught up in um, our human, like we have this time frame in our mind of how things should go, and that's not always the best way. It's a way. It's a way. In fact, before I even read this, uh, I want to bring up a separate trip, not me, but I've mentioned this to a member of my family before, who had a trip earlier this year, and she ended up getting to the airport. She was at the airport in plenty of time, but the line to check her bag was so long that it was going to cause her to miss her flight. And so, long story short, she like forced her way through. She like cut her way in the line of security to make sure she got to that gate, to make sure she got on that flight. But then she continued to have a series of unfortunate events. And I knew when she did that, and I didn't say it to her at the time because it was, that wouldn't have been very appropriate. She was all up in her own, like, freaking out and frustrations and whatever. So that would not have been helpful. But at the time it was happening, I was like, I knew I was just at that point for me starting to learn about, like, just go with the flow. Just, there's a reason why she's not able to get to that gate on time. But her forcing it allowed her to get on the flight, but I don't think it allowed her to experience the highest and best scenario of that trip, because then another batch of like unfortunate events happened that were very frustrating for her. Again, maybe it was for her highest and best good because she learned a lot of lessons from it, right? So who am I to judge? Maybe that was the highest and best for where she was there. But I knew for where she was energetically and with her belief systems, that probably was the highest and best. But me looking back from like a 10,000 foot view, I just knew that there was something better. There was a way that she could get there that didn't require her to like run, sweating, cutting in line, doing all these things. Like, there's clearly she was resisting where Spirit was trying to take her, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So now that I've drugged that out, but that's just another example of how sometimes that's what we do. We get caught up in the outcomes and we get attached to the outcomes, usually because of some belief system that if it doesn't go this exact way that I think it should, then it's going to be worse. When a lot of times it doesn't go that exact way because there's something better. So how do you change that mindset? Okay, so Swan Spirit is what came out. Time for a deep dive. Time for a deep dive. So think about a swan. First of all, they're very beautiful. I just want to say it. This is a very beautiful picture. Um, a swan, if you think about how they eat, like, this is what I'm getting from this, is that like they dive into the water to find their nourishment, to find their sustenance, right? To find the fish or the whatever. Like, it's deep down within. It's not coming up to its mouth, right? Like, they have to go in to get it. And I think that's a lot of this journey for us. It's really most of this journey for us is the deep dive. And when we don't take the time to dive deep within, then there's a bunch we're missing out. We're missing out on the transformation that's intended for us, is what's happening. And I say we're missing out. We're still learning. We're just learning at a super slow pace when we keep everything at the surface level. So it's really about the deep dive. But culturally, we have been taught to shut a lot of that deep stuff off, to like deal with it, get over it, move on, whatever. And so it does us a disservice, because what then happens is it causes us to focus, instead of focusing on our own issues, we're focusing on everybody else's issues, and we're wanting to change and fix everybody else instead of looking at the log in our own eye, right? Um, Okay, so that's what I'm getting from this is that it's time for a deep dive. What are you believing that has you cutting off the guidance from spirit? What are you believing that has you thinking that your timing is better than spirit's timing, or that your path is better than spirit's path? Or what are you believing? I think for some people, I'm sensing that some people might be believing that there's some reason why they aren't allowed to hear directly from God, that like they don't get to the benefit of those breadcrumbs. It's not for them. Not true. It's happening to you, for you, and happening for everyone. But we have been trained to tune out. We've tuned out of that radio station. We've tuned out of that TV channel into something different. And it's generally the world and what's going on around us. And it's loud, and it's you can't hear, you can't get the messages when we're tuned into that station. The answers are deep within here. So the oracle messages, with their graceful long necks, swans are able to reach into the depths. When swan spirit arrives, you're called to take a deep dive beyond what is easily available on the surface. You may think you know what is best for you now, but take the plunge into the depths of your awareness. For there is knowledge you are not aware of and great treasures to discover. That's what this whole trip has been for us. This whole canceled trip has been great treasures of discovery and learning for us. Deeper understanding awaits you, and a perspective that comes from greater self-knowledge is what you need right now to better understand a situation or relationship. As you come to know yourself more intimately, so too you will come to know better. Sorry. As you come to know yourself more intimately, so too will you come to better know others. So Swan Spirit asks you to go beyond the surface of what is happening between you and others and resist the temptation to judge by superficial appearances. Know there is much deeper potential for loving connections, forgiveness, and mutual understanding. Choose to dive deep into your why, asking the deeper questions of yourself. You are led by the grace of Swan Spirit. I love that. For those of you that have seen some of the past videos about the cancellation of this trip or the rebooking of this trip, it was all tied to my husband's passport being expired. There was a moment, a brief 10 seconds of anger. And that's all anger should take. If you're feeling a negative emotion for longer than 10 to 15 seconds, if you feel it for 10 to 15 seconds, first of all, don't shame yourself. Like, that's our emotions. That's our guidance system. That's telling you where you're at, what you're thinking. But within 10 to 15 seconds, you should recognize I'm feeling something negative. And that tells me that whatever I'm thinking or believing is out of alignment with what my soul, what my higher mind knows to be true. So how do I get back into alignment? And if you're angry for longer than 10 or 15 seconds, you've just moved into judgment, is what's happened. You've moved into a place of judgment. And guess what? We're not supposed to be judging anything, right? It doesn't benefit us to do that. Um, Anyway, so I had those first few seconds where I was angry at my husband before I realized like there's no need to be angry. That's not what's happening here. This is happening for our good. So I love this. Know there is a much deeper potential for loving connections, forgiveness, and mutual understanding. Choose to deep dive into your why. Um, because because my husband and I were able to recognize that old belief of like somebody has to be to blame. Somebody screwed up and they have to be to blame, as opposed to this was divine intervention. And allowing us to embrace that actually caused this entire, what I'll call catastrophe, to be the biggest blessing to our relationship. It's one of the better things that happened for us this year as we've learned to maneuver through out of old unhealthy belief systems that were hurtful to our marriage, like the blame game, into something much more beautiful and peaceful and understanding. And so that's the beauty of Swan Spirit. When we do the deep dive, the beauty that comes from within, that comes forth from within, like you just become a shining star in your own right, within your relationships. I'm not saying I'm the shining star in my marriage, but like we're both reflecting love and light to one another. It was a two-way street. So anyway, your beauty's coming out. It wants to come out. So let's listen to that. Okay, that's all I have. I think that's all the that spirit wanted to get through on this message. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace out.